Good afternoon to you. My name is Monique Fortuné, and we're here, of course, representing Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. And today's topic, knowledge and nourishment, we focus on the theology of love, and particularly talking about being a first year seminarian. My opportunity to be able to be an orientation ambassador along with Brandon and James has been very rich and wonderful. And this is a conversation about how we all, in a time of pandemic, need to be mindful of how we stay connected as community, how we stay connected. If we look at it from a Buddhist term, Sangha, as we stay connected in terms of the great Shalom in Islamic tradition, we can go on and on, but we're community and we're here a week after orientation to perhaps answer some questions that because there was so much information coming at you so quickly during orientation, this is kind of the special space, the sacred space, where we can have more elongated conversation about your first year in seminary. Again, my name is Monique Fortuné. I'm a third year MDiv candidate, and my concentration is psychology and religion. I'm going to throw it to Brandon, and he's going to bring you greetings.
Hello, my name's Brandon. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a second year MA student, and I'm concentrating in psychology and religion. Jay.
Hi everyone, I'm James. I use they, them pronouns, third year MDiv, and studying interdisciplinary concentration, practical and public theology. I'm super excited to be part of this conversation. Monique, do you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Again, a conversation. Wanted to remind everybody, my pronouns are she, her, Elia. And right now, theology. What is a theology of love? How do you define it, Jay? We're going to start with you and then Brandon.
To me, I come from understanding a theology of love from a Christian perspective, specifically in the United Church of Christ, where divine love is something that fills the world that we live in. And when you realize that you are loved by God, it is that same love that you could share with other people. So when you have the love of God within you, that is something that you can go out and share with other people.
I like that. Because you can't hold it for yourself. It needs to be shared. It needs to be spread around. Brandon.
Yeah, well, I think I've seen a couple of quotes about this, but I don't remember who to attribute it to, but somebody once said that love is defined by, like, no one defines love for you. It's different for everybody. So I think like that's the place that I start with first, is that for all of us, depending on our particular backgrounds and experiences and social identities, that it's different for us. And yeah, I think I resonate with that generally. And for me, love has been like a theology of love recently has been just like existence. I think just thinking about love as synonymous with existence and like being, and just yeah, I don't even really know how to explain it beyond that, but just like thinking about like love holds me in this existence, and existence is the thing that holds me, and that's kind of the thing that I feel most like spiritually connected with when I think about theology of love.
I hear that. I resonate with so much of what has been said. For me, I look at love as a verb, love as in action. I look at love as a comfort. I look at love as connection. I look at it as something that's always to be discovered and to be explored and to stay open to, and to know that it does hold us, Brandon. It does connect us. And everybody's got to find their own path in regard to that. And it's wonderful when we are able to explore the kindred, we're able to explore the commonalities. And that's one of the greatest things about living, that we explore and we learn and we hold love for each other and we hold space for each other. And I like what James said about the UCC tradition, because both of us, we are aspiring towards ordination in the UCC tradition, United Church of Christ. And one of the most important things is to make sure that we have a mindfulness, a consciousness about being welcoming and affirming and open. And during a time of pandemic, during a time of challenge, circumstances that we've never really explored or had to deal with before, that theology of love becomes real in a very different way. We all had the great honor and opportunity to be orientation ambassadors this past week. And one of the things that I really reflect on and I think about, and I don't know about you, is number one, I was just so happy that we got through it all virtually. What was the largest lesson in love? Because that was our theme. Love holds us in union. What was the largest love lesson from this past orientation for you?
I can start with that, I think. For me, I think it was really beautiful, like how we were still able to come together during this time, and it went a lot better than I expected that it was going to go. And I think a lot of what happened during orientation, and that happens generally during any orientation, is that like students get excited about being at this place at Union, and I think discover that, you know, like our theme, that there is like a really strong connection that will hold them during their time here. But I think like one of the lessons that I was reflecting on towards the end of orientation now is like we didn't really talk a lot about also like what love looks like holding an institution accountable, and like what love looks like in terms of justice and more communally, rather than just like holding us as individual students, but like what does it look for us to love in return and to do that. And, you know, like any institution, like Union has its staff that it needs to be held accountable to, just like any other institution or organization. And so I think that was like one thing that I was left reflecting on, is how we amplify that message, how we continue to hold our institution accountable, because that's love too, to like imagine a higher potential for Union, of which we are a part of as well.
I hear that. Jay?
Yeah, I really resonate with Brandon's point about holding institutions accountable, and like what does justice look like within an institution. I feel like sometimes those things like may not go together right away or go together at all. So really having to navigate what that looks like and figuring that out. So thank you, Brandon, for bringing that point up.
Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, for me, like one of my takeaways was trusting that love will happen. I approached this thinking like, how can we make students, or how can we like promote this like feeling of being connected in community? And so part of like what we did and was making these like videos introducing students and staff and faculty and administrators, just to make students feel like, you know, you belong in this community, even though we're not here together right now. And I was really concerned about that. I was like, I just don't know how this is going to happen. Like, how can people feel connected through Zoom like that? And it really, I feel like it really happened. You know, people wanted to like stick around after orientation was over for the day, and the chat was like just constantly on fire, and people were super nice and graceful with each other too, especially during the different trainings. So yeah, love shows up.
I like what you're saying about love shows up, Jay, because that was something that I really connected to in terms of how people listened to each other very deeply throughout our engagements, whether we were doing academic orientation, whether we were doing courageous conversations, whether we were doing the health and wellness piece with Dr. Danielson, how deeply people were present. And I also feel that's a manifestation of love in terms of how we can work together, how we can be together and be able to connect to one another in terms of you matter, and that indeed you are someone that I need to hear, even if we don't have the same point of view, even if we don't have the same understanding, but the presence, that was a big lesson. That was a big takeaway from me. And this goes to show how deeply people were listening to each other, that they would post certain things on the Facebook page and respond to people's concerns about travel or respond to people's concerns about coming into the dormitories. I mean, that's the biggest takeaway, that people cared that much, that people were that present. And that's going to be important in the days, weeks, and months ahead, that we continue to manifest love in that way. Very important. Now, first year seminary. Okay. What probably, if you could go back, Brandon, what's the advice that you would give to a first year seminarian or to yourself?
I need to think about it for a second.
Good morning.
You go first, or Monique, maybe do you have anything that you want to share to that first?
I would probably think the biggest advice I would give to myself was to take care of my temple, to make sure that I am sleeping, to make sure that I am focused on life balance, exercising, making sure I go to my doctor's appointments, making sure that I spend time with friends and family, making sure that I pay attention and lean in to community that can help and support me, whether that's study group, whether that's getting acquainted and getting comfortable with my fellow classmates. So there were times when I was so connected to, I have to really be great. I'm back in school and I have to make sure that assignments are on time and that I'm doing everything well. And then I turn around and I cancel a doctor's appointment that I need to go to, or I'm not paying attention to returning my best friend's phone call. I don't go to the gym as often, or I don't go to yoga class as often. So that's the biggest advice. Take care of the temple. Take care of yourself, body, mind, and soul. Pay attention. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I would definitely amplify it. I do have something to share that made me think of that in terms of like a piece of kind of like care for self. I think this is more so applies when we're in person, but I think it'll definitely apply virtually as well. But one thing was just leaning into community outside of Union. Like for me, I joined a queer volleyball league in the city during, well, last semester before COVID started, or at least was more affected here anyway. And that was really helpful for me in like terms of like building community in a different way, I guess. But even I think like virtually, like what are other places to build community? If students aren't in the city, like, is there groups that students might want to get involved with, like Democratic Socialists of America, as an organizing body, or another political organizing body, or faith community in the city that's outside of the union community, so that there's like a good balance, because otherwise the seminary experience can just suck so much out of you in a very good way, but also in a way that's so taxing. And there needs to be a place, I think, to lean outside of it as well.
Absolutely. That we pay attention to, wait a minute, in our student senate, we have ministers of fun. And what I started thinking about a couple of months into my first year is that I have to be my own minister of fun. And I've got to be able to go back. I went to a place called Banana Skirt, which is at the Pearl Studios, right across the street from Macy's Herald Square. And I said, I have to go back to dance class. And we had a wonderful instructor at Banana Skirt named Nikki. And Nikki said, you just need to dance out whatever happened during the week. She said, have fun. She said, that's essential. And when I, just like you, Brandon, in terms of your volleyball team, when I went back to dance class at Banana Skirt, I was with community. We didn't have to talk about work or school. We just understood that a large part of our experience in life is to have fun. Don't forget that. As a source of relief, as a source of release, as a source of interacting and learning, it's important. It's important. For you, Jay?
For me, I've been thinking about wishing that I came to Union as an incoming student, wishing that I was more open-minded and not so set in my theology. I felt like I had a whole bunch of answers and that I was coming to this like 3-year MDiv program just sort of like as a formality, but I ended up learning so much. And something that I really want to emphasize is the subjectivity of our experience and of our theologies. Because I feel like, especially like Christians do this, like as a Christian, like I could say this in Union, is moving towards being interfaith, but is really grounded in the Christian tradition, is that it's sort of used as like this ultimate reality when really it is just one of many subjective realities. And so for me, one thing that was really challenging was understanding the resurrection in a way that was still true, but not necessarily true as a historical event. And so I defer to Marcus Borg, our theologian Marcus Borg, if you want to read more about that and what he says about what the resurrection really is. In my opinion, that, not to say that it really is what Marcus Borg says, but that's sort of what I resonate with.
You're segueing beautifully into the next part of the conversation. I was just talking to a wonderful mentor of mine, Dr. Gail Davis, and she said, well, how's it going? You're going into your 3rd year. I said, but I got to go back to my 1st year for a minute to reflect and realize how I had to learn, and to your point, Jay, unlearn certain things and then learn again. So it was a deconstruction my 1st year, constructing and then reconstructing certain things. And particularly because at Union, we now have MDiv program for Christian track, Buddhist track, Islam. What was important to me once I got my hold in terms of taking things such as Old Testament and taking New Testament, I said, wait a minute. What's also very important is that I have an inter-religious understanding. And so many assumptions I had made about the Buddhist faith and so many assumptions I had made about Islam. Religion in the city, as it was called at that time, was extremely helpful. When I was able to go and visit and do salat at the Islamic Center of New York at NYU, when I was able to go and, with my friend Carla, to the old Broadway synagogue And she was showing me and explaining to me why women had to go upstairs and be separate from men. And I'm, what's that? But to really understand that I needed to understand and not just jump to certain conclusions. And then, of course, when I went to the Buddhist temple of a friend of mine on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and getting a deeper understanding about chanting by sitting and talking with the Buddhist priest after the service and getting some deeper insight. Like you, Jay, I said, ooh, let me check my assumptions. Let me check my selectivity and open up a little bit here. So I feel you on that, definitely. Brandon, anything?
In terms of learning and unlearning and relearning, yeah, I think like before I came to Union, how I've described it to friends before is that like I did a lot of deconstructing of theology, and I come from a Christian background. And yeah, I did a lot of deconstructing, but didn't really have a solid constructing or reconstructing, and that was part of the purpose that I came to Union. And I resonate with your experiences, Monique, and there's some of those from Dr. Rhodes's interreligious engagement class too. Yeah, I think that class was really formative for me as well, and like reconstructing something new. I think Union, in terms of like relearning, has given a lot of like language to experiences and thoughts, and more like more formal language that I hadn't previously had before. I kind of think about it like in a therapeutic context in a way. In therapy, I like sometimes get language for things that I'm feeling and experiencing, and so it like formalizes it, and then it like makes me feel more affirmed for myself, but then it makes me feel like I show up better as well, in terms of how I interact with other people too.
I like, Brandon, what we're talking about in terms of showing up. And again, rewind just a bit to the first year experience. How did you realize? Was there a moment or moments where you realized, I'm showing up, I'm the right person at the right place at the right time in terms of Union? Was there any what we call showing up moments? I know I have one story, but I'll hold off.
I think you should share your story.
Let me tell you, here's how it happened. I remember because I'm a commuter student, so in the midst of getting into the swing of seminary, I'm still working. I have a consulting firm. I'm still teaching at Fordham University. I'm still trying to balance my life. And somebody just looked at me in the eye and saw me rushing. And she pulled me aside and she said, there's pizza in AD 30. We're getting ready to do a student senate meeting. And I said, well, I got to. She said, it's October. And don't you think you should get to know more people? Because I loved how this third year student came to me and made an observation and felt comfortable enough to say, will you slow down, please? You're so caught up in the doing. We need you to be more engaged in the being. Long story short, after that meeting, I became a co-chair of Partner and Family Caucus. But that's one thing I really love about the Union community, that sometimes folks will see something in you that you don't see in yourself. And I think that's also a manifestation of the theology of love, that we say certain things that might be difficult. Somebody might be, what are you talking about? But if it's done sincerely and from a place of love, I heard it. I said, Monique, you have to slow down. And I never regretted that day, walking into AD 30, having a slice of pizza, and certain people who are now very close to me, I met that day in that student senate meeting. So that's the story. That's the story.
That sounds like a experience that like grounds you at Union too.
It did. It did.
Yeah.
It did.
James, do you have any experiences like that that you can think of?
Yeah, something that I'm thinking about is in the communicating live class with CC DeWolf, and how like that the term show up is like used very often, like you show up to meet the live moment and connect with people. And I had this really pivotal moment in that class where it was just like really transformative in terms of evaluating like what are the things that are important when I'm communicating. And we had this one assignment we had to read. I don't even remember what it was. It was just like this essay that someone had written. And we had to read it, take notes on it, and then come to class. And Cece like had like bulletin board paper and markers, and we had to draw a map of our outline, put it up on the wall, and then talk about it. And I was so concerned about like, oh my God, like there's so much to this essay. There are so many points in this essay. I don't know how I'm gonna do this. And I'm literally sitting there like looking at my notepad and like trying to make eye contact with people. And then I just sort of realized like, it's okay to not have every single detail. What's important is that you convey a message that resonates with someone else, and that you connect with another person, and that you love the other person in that moment.
Something else that I think is so important to realize during your time at Union, and I think we touched on it earlier, is how do you then, as Union community, relate in an outer world, quote unquote? Because we laugh and we joke about the Union bubble. We can get very comfortable. Oh, we're going to hang out in the library with our study group for New Testament, or we're going to just hammer down and hang out in the pit and have some conversations. Going to the Proctor conference, the Samuel Proctor conference for me this year, before we had shut down, before the pandemic in February, was a very critical time for me personally and professionally, to go to Crystal City, not too far from Washington, D.C., of course, and to collaborate and to touch and agree with so many people of color who are doing what I'm doing what I aspire to do. There were so many elders there who were able to lift me and to teach me. There were scholars there. There were people who specialized in practical theology, such as spiritual direction and spiritual formation. So this is something early on for people who are listening that I really want to convey, that it's also important to share and to go with your Union colleagues to different conferences, to present papers, to sit, listen, and absorb and understand that you're not alone in this journey, and to build connection and to build opportunities for mentorship. So that's something that's so wonderful at Union, that there's a range, just a range of intergenerational, interreligious conferences, seminars, symposiums that you can go to. And I'm going to be very, very honest in terms of disclosure. What occurred during that time in February at the Proctor Conference, my uncle died, my father's brother. And I felt so loved by the Union community, by the 20 of us who were there. And everybody was checking in on me. And they said, "You're going to stay?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Everything will be fine. And I'll be with my family when we get back home on Sunday." But it was great because I got to meet seminarians from all over the world. I was able to meet particular scholars and particular ministers that I've always admired or I read about. And we also, as Union community, it was great to be in the hotel lobby, and we would plan, all right, we're going to this workshop, you go to that workshop so you can learn more about social justice, and youth. No, you go to this one so you can learn more about health and healing in spiritual dynamic. And those kinds of moments are priceless. They're priceless. They're so important. And I don't know, has anything like that manifested for you that you want to share?
I don't know if this is completely related to your point, Monique, but it reminds me of like some of the meaningful people that you can meet at Union, and it sounds like that was like a meaningful community for you, even outside of New York City. But I took a class with an instructor the first semester I was here, and had a really good experience with them. And then this summer, I was supposed to do a chaplaincy internship at New York Presbyterian Hospital, but because of COVID, couldn't do it. And another one of our classmates was also going to do chaplaincy internship as well, or CPE, but theirs also got canceled. And so the two of us spontaneously decided to do an EMT class and get trained. And we asked this instructor that I had that I really enjoyed to do a guided reading with us related to it in terms of like spiritual care and emergency response. And we talked about like moral injury and COVID and just like equitable care for people in emergency response. And it was like such a great experience. In terms of connecting between the three of us, in terms of the content and just like making the best out of a, kind of crappy situation. But it reminded me a lot of like at Union, there's a lot of space and flexibility in terms of like creating something for ourselves and doing something of our own. And I was really grateful to have an instructor who now I would really consider a mentor, I think, in a lot of ways, and to like stay connected going forward. I'm really excited about too.
Brandon, that's a great commentary about the importance of creating a niche or creating space through guided readings, opportunities at Union. I know I have benefited tremendously from the two that I have had. I had one with who is now with us in terms of our preaching professor, Dr. Timothy Atkins Jones. I did a guided reading with him in the fall of 2019 and learned so much about preaching and homiletics from him. And like you said, the relationship grows. Yes, you have to take care of the content and the scholarly requirements, but also conversation and being able to really relate, because he's a pastor of a church in New Jersey, so he understood my balance in terms of study and work. And so you begin to create those kinds of relationships that you can lean into for support. And then also something that I thought was really important was to do a guided reading during the time of pandemic that looks at spiritual care. Yes, there's a lot of work that many of us are going to do to take care of others. And you learn a lot about that in your second year when you get involved in field education. But how are we caring for ourselves? And it was a journaling class. And we were learning about how to care for ourselves through writing and to then understand how connecting to our emotions, connecting to our trauma or our own concerns, how can we then be more relatable to the people that we serve in our communities? And how can we be more effective in our individual ministries? So that's a big recommendation that I would make early on. Create that path for guided reading. Jay, you've done some, haven't you?
I haven't done a guided reading specifically, but I've been able to help create my field education experience, specifically doing some queer theology. So in a way, I'm doing something like a guided reading, but so I'm doing my field at a Fort Washington Collegiate Church, And on every first Wednesday in the evening, we have Queer Theology God Talk, which is basically just like a Bible study. But I created the space to delve into queer topics because that was something that I wanted to learn more about. And a lot of the people who already went to God Talk were queer or trans. So there was already that interest there going. And it was really, really great to like make that space to delve into these topics. Like, okay, why does like the coat of many colors in the story of Joseph, why does that term in Hebrew only appear in one other place in the Bible to refer to like a princess robe? So like, what is the meaning for that for Joseph in terms of like, is Joseph a gender non-conforming character? What's really going on with like David and Jonathan? To me, it kind of seems like they're lovers if David is going to say that his love for Jonathan surpassed the love of women. Okay, what's going on with like Mary Magdalene, where her name is like Mary of Magdalene, not associated with like any man, not like Mary, sister of, wife of, or anything like that. Like a question that I have, what is like a lesbian reading of Mary Magdalene? Like I'm interested in knowing that. Other people are too. So I've been able to make space in that way and also share it in community too, because there are people who have these questions. And it's not something that comes up very often either, because, you know, you go to church and you're just like sitting in the pews and thinking, oh, okay. And that's like really what it means to queer a space, is to contribute, for queer people to contribute their own theology to reshape the community.
Exactly. And it's the creation that it's coming from you, and that sometimes, particularly in terms of this seminary journey, that more questions come up than answers. We now have Q&A coming from our audience. We appreciate that. Let me read it out loud. What have you learned through your time at Union about being held in love and holding others in love that you will use in your future ministry? And how has this shaped your future ministry? Thank you, Shana, for that. Appreciate that. We appreciate you. Go ahead. I see that. Brandon, did you want to say something about that?
Sure, I can. For me, I'm interested in a career in school psychology, or doing more schooling in school psychology, and specifically working in a high school with adolescents in therapeutic contexts and interventions. And I think, I mean, one thing that I've really learned from the people, I would say, at Union, is just learning to be like held by people and really letting that love hold me. Wow, it comes full circle. Maybe I'm just projecting. But yeah, I think I've learned a lot about that, specifically for a lot of the first years who take the pastoral care and listening class at Union, and really learning more about pastoral care and pastoral listening. That was something that I really worked on a lot more, is just like letting myself be like truly listened and held. And so I think like that's like something I'm taking into a future career, working with young people, or hopefully working with young people, as I intend to do, is just being able to bring that and think about like, what does it really mean to hold others? And specifically, it's something I'm still like learning and thinking about and growing in, that I don't think I've experienced so much in, is like how to like really hold young people specifically as its own like category. A group of people who experience their own sort of marginalized social identities, and then are maybe compounded by other social identities of race, class, gender, sexuality, etc. And yeah, so I'm just thinking about like, what does that look like for me to hold love with them? And that's something I'm still learning about, and something that's been implicated by my time at Union, I think.
You know, I hear that, because for me, the holding of love has been loving God and truly loving myself, and releasing many years ago feeling as if I had to present a public self and that the private self was very different. And one of the largest things that I've learned at Union is that God's love manifests when I'm real. There's no private public, there's Monique. As a Afro-Caribbean womanist minister to be, as somebody who is a poet, an artist, embracing all of who I am. And I'm hearing that also in terms of a process that if I love God and if I truly love myself, I can pass that love along in terms of the work that I aspire to do in leadership, consulting, scholarly endeavor in terms of teaching, the work that I wish to do in spiritual formation and direction, but most importantly, to be a contributor in terms of social justice, to be able to speak out for all people, to be an advocate for myself and for others, for everybody. And that's a process of learning. In terms of the opportunities that I've had to grow in terms of learning about queer theology, to learn more about love theology, to learn more about the traditions of others in terms of not the other anymore, but us, we, and growing in that. So that's something that I'm looking forward to, that there's still always something to learn. There's always something to grow in, which I'm grateful for. Jay?
For me, one question that I found that I had in my second year at Union was, how do I love people who cause harm to me and other people? That was an ongoing topic in Field Ed. I would bring it up like almost every week. I would just be like, I just don't understand like how I'm supposed to love this person when they're, you know, being homophobic towards me or whatever. And something that I've learned is that everyone comes from their own context, and everyone is informed by their own context, and loving them, in terms of like loving them, like you can still love someone, you can like still see the divine spark in someone and still hold them accountable. And so I defer to transformative justice, which is not punitive, but I feel like it realizes that people are capable of change and being better and doing less harm.
I like what you're saying about do no harm. In so many traditions, we examine that. In the Hindu tradition, of course, the Vedic tradition, we also look at it definitely in Christianity, in Buddhism, Confucianism, we definitely examine that in Islam. But in a time such as this, what's your strength and your power? What keeps us moving forward? Because certain folks have said to me, you didn't take a deferment, you didn't take a leave. Monique, you're starting your third year. And I know during the orientation, when I had individual conversations with people, I made it very clear that I found it admirable that they were pressing on. So what's the source of you pressing on? That's open to anybody who wants to answer it.
I'll go. You know, for me, it was just like, I'm about to enter my third year. I have a great relationship with my field ed site, and I really wanted to keep that going. That was a huge motivating factor, is that I had a church community and I had the union community rooting for me to succeed. And that was really part of my decision. And also, I just like really want to graduate and like start working soon. So, you know, if I deferred for a year, like there's nothing wrong with that. But I am really an ambitious person, and so I really just want to finish up.
I hear you. I hear that. Brandon?
Yeah, I think I'm with Jay too, because I think it's, you know, a perfectly reasonable and normal experience to defer during this time, especially like it may not be as accessible of a learning platform for certain folks, the way that we are learning right now. So I definitely think that that's, a normal experience. But for me, it's, really similar in terms of like, this is my last semester and and I'm trying to, apply for more school. And so I want to keep going and trucking on.
I feel the same way. I'm excited about moving forward and applying for doctoral programs and just really excited about what the future will bring. In terms of my art and activism, that's very important to me in terms of my writing and publishing and moving forward because I feel my experiences at Union have really affirmed that, through activities with chapel and being able to do interdisciplinary, interdenominational, interfaith, interreligious connection, that's really helped me manifest and see what's next in the work that I must do. And similar to you, James, I had a very progressive experience at Middle Collegiate Church in terms of interning and learning so much about church management, about leadership, about how to write a good sermon. What's the difference between a sermon and a homily? How do we now take these skills and get people psyched up to vote? Make sure that people are filling out their census forms, making sure that it's not just us being the church, working in the church, but what I also like about this conversation is that we're also talking about temple, synagogue being out in community, out and putting feet to the faith and moving forward and doing the work that's necessary and important. So, what's going on in terms of what seminary has done for you in terms of putting feet to your faith? What has Union done to contribute to that? I know for me, I've done a lot more work in terms of grief and mourning. I do a workshop at Middle Collegiate Church called Do the Right Thing, which is starting again October 7th for a month on Wednesday evenings. And we journal in terms of dealing with the issues of pandemic, dealing with loss on many levels, whether that is loved ones, colleagues, issues, employment, but we're utilizing that sacred time together, that 90 minutes, to be able to be creative, to utilize the writing as something cathartic. And I know this particular idea that I had would have never come to manifestation if I wasn't paying attention to the community that I was serving, the particular church where I was doing Field Edge. So what say you about that? James talked a little bit about that earlier, but what else can we say about that? How Union has impacted the social justice work or the particular activism you're involved in right now?
I think for me, I think that's a good question. And I would say in my own context, I've worked in youth work and I majored, or my undergrad was in agricultural education. So in education related studies. And I hadn't really thought about like youth in terms of being marginalized peoples in themselves, and especially when it's compounded by other social identities. And so I think that is one reason I'm really glad that I came to Union, is before entering into more youth work in the future, is being able to have that context as to like how to elevate young people's voices. So I think that's like one thing that I've like had a more critical analysis towards, and something that I'm definitely still really like learning about because it's pretty fresh to me, since I've really only been at Union a year, and gathered more language for that. But yeah, that's one thing for me.
Very important that we pay attention to all voices, that everyone matters, and that we advocate for each other, no matter where we are in life.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Anything, James?
I might just dovetail off like what I was saying before about my field ed and what I'm doing with queer theology. Um, so much of the energy of queer people goes into figuring out like how to deconstruct Leviticus or how to deconstruct like Romans 1 or like those clobber passages and like what you really do, like what do you do with that? And we spend so much time and energy. There are books upon books. Okay, there's a whole book out there literally on Romans 1, 26 to 28. A whole book, okay? Like there's so much research out there. But the liberation of queer Christians is not only located in deconstructing Leviticus, it's also looking at these other passages and queering them, looking at them with a queer lens and going outward with that. So you have sort of this like transformation that goes on when you sort of realize like, oh, I could do this. Like I could, like any queer person can do queer theology. Any queer person can talk about God. And I think that's really important because there are a lot of queer people who need to hear that God loves them, that they are created in the image of God.
It's true. In terms of being able to liberate ourselves through conversation, through connection, I know particularly this past summer when I was involved in several prayer vigils and protests around Black Lives Matter, I had to really sit back and think about my theology again in terms of, well, wait a minute. If supposedly, if I'm ministering to other people, how am I ministering to myself? Because I'm angry about so much that has gone on in terms of racism, homophobia, xenophobia. But hold on, if it's truly about the theology of love, I need to check myself. And I need to be able to say, who do I lean into? Whether that be a best friend, a mentor, whether that be somebody who can provide spiritual direction. How can I say, wait a minute, how can I get beyond the anger and the frustration? And it will come and it will be there. That is a reality. But I think one thing in terms of the union experience and being able to lean into so many brilliant people is that there's still hope to do things, and everybody's going to do things very differently. There are some who are going to move into the academy. There are some who are going to really, I mean, it's fantastic at Union that we now have a chaplaincy program that it's really, we're beginning to understand how important it is to cultivate the chaplaincy talent and the call. That yes, there are trans people who are at Rikers who are going to need a chaplain. They need that. There are going to be young people who are in detention who are going to need very serious mentoring and support around self-esteem. So, my goodness, what we're able to do in terms of cultivating awareness and knowing that there's always another opportunity to learn and to learn and to learn again. And we're getting close to wrapping up. So something that's on my mind, I don't know about you, because I want to take full advantage of this time that we've had together, because I feel like we're finally coming down from all the activity of this summer and all the work we have done. I always like to know what people read this summer. What did you read that has awakened your mind or your soul? And what might be a recommendation that you can offer in terms of our colleagues, our fellow seminarians and friends who are watching and listening? I know for me, a book that blew my mind this summer was The Wounded Healer by, I'm going to pronounce it properly, Henri Nouwen, Nouwen, because it helped me understand how, and I liked what you talked about, Jay, in terms of how do you forgive people? How do you still extend love to people who may not always love you back? And I've been wounded by that. I remember being bullied for a little while when I was a child, and that went deep. And one thing that was talked about in The Wounded Healer is acknowledging that love does also come with pain, but with that understanding how we develop love more and more is to love ourselves into a healing and to be able to, no matter what the circumstance, be unshakable in our relationship with the Creator and with ourselves, you know? So that was an important book for me this summer. Anybody else? Or even before the summer, even an important book, period.
I'll share. I reread all of the Harry Potter books, and that was like the most of what I read, which was great. But you know, J.K. Rowling is also like transphobic, so I'll not leave that as my suggestion completely. And I'll leave the TV series, which is more trans-centric. And I watched Pose on Netflix, which I'm like late to the game, but honestly is so good. So that will be my recommendation.
Cool. But even what you read, challenging what you read and what you receive. Just don't take it in, say, I don't know. I got questions. Good. Like that, like that, like that. What else, Jay?
Something that I read, this is a free resource for anyone who has an interest in the history of the United Church of Christ. I took UCC Polity this summer, and there is a series called Hidden Histories of the UCC. And I spent some time researching how people in the congregational tradition were violent towards people in what is today the United States, specifically Indigenous people from First Nations. And that has really framed, I think, a lot of problems in not only in the United Church of Christ today, but also in mainline Protestant denominations that are mostly white, the challenges that they face, and really what they should be doing to engage in the pursuit of justice.
Because we got work. We got work. I mean, we got 5 minutes left in our conversation. And Jay, I think you just bringing forth the real, that when you come to seminary, it's not utopia. It's not be all end all. It is not panacea, that we're still dealing with a range of issues. We're dealing with a range of frustrations, just injustices that still need to be addressed. And where we're serving in terms of particular denominations are not perfect. And part of the work at Union and what we're known for and what we pray we continue to be known for in the future is that we address these particular issues, not just with love, but with certain pragmatics, with particular wisdom, with particular good measure and discernment. So as we wrap up, final thoughts about the days ahead. We're still in pandemic. We're still going to be in virtual classes. So how do we continue to remember that love holds us in union? Brandon can start.
I think just, getting off the screen, off the Zoom, whenever we can, interacting with people obviously reminds us of like how we're loved and in community with each other. But, sometimes we have to disconnect technologically to remind ourselves as well. So pausing, getting out, whatever it is, that'll be my parting thought.
And we need to take some sacred pauses. Go out for a walk in the park.
Yep.
Go and read a book. Call a friend. Mm-hmm. Jay?
Yeah, I was just going to say, go outside, go to a park and sit under the trees and eat some good food and drink lots of water.
Mm-hmm. Stay hydrated, would you please? For me, silence has been very important. My meditation practice has really deepened since I have been coping, and we've all been coping with the pandemic, that we still need to be safe, but we still need to be a part of the world. We still need to exercise, and we still need to stay engaged with one another. So I'm just grateful for this time that we were able to talk about the theology of love. We were really able to address some issues. Thanks so much for being so open, for being so real about where we are. And forward movement in these days and times can be a bit more precarious, but it can happen. So let's give each other grace. Let's give each other hard line and truth when necessary with love. But let's move forward. We're still here. And I thank everybody. I really thank the development office at Union Theological Seminary for making this space possible. Shout out to them. Shout out to our entering class of 2020. Let's keep moving forward. Shout out to our returning students. Can't wait to see everybody in person again. And shout out to administration, faculty, staff at Union who are working extraordinarily hard in these extraordinary times. So Brandon, Jay, any last words?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.